I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. It was a difficult year for biotechs, with drops in the major biotech indices, fewer new drug approvals, and more than 125 companies announcing layoffs. But there were also triumphs to celebrate. We continue our annual tradition of ending the old year and ushering in the new one with Adam Feuerstein, Polk Award Winning journalist and senior biotech writer for Stat. We discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of biotech in 2022, Feuerstein's annual best and worst CEO list, and what's ahead at JPMorgan and beyond in 2023. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Danny, Happy New Year. Happy holidays. It's always wonderful to talk to you.
Thanks. Well, this is an annual ritual for us.
So it is.
I appreciate you taking the time.
Sure.
It was a down year for approvals, a down year on the finance front. More than 125 biotechs announced layoffs, and there's a swelling of the ranks of microcaps in the biotech sector. Was it as bad a year for biotechs as it sounds?
Well, put it that way, Danny. I mean, why are we even doing this? Man. It was kind of a year where I felt like, I was saying this to a colleague of mine, like it felt like it was sort of a continuation of 21, where it just it never really got any better. It just sort of got a little bit progressively worse, sort of like COVID, right? Over an extended period of time and almost to the point where you sort of get used to the bad news and the down market, right? Like you kind of just learn to live with it.
So this is long biotech, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's like a slog now. Like all the things that you just said, Danny, are absolutely true. So yeah, it's been a really challenging year for the industry, for people who invest in the industry. There were some bright spots, and we should talk about some of those bright spots. Because I don't think no one wants to listen to us just complain about things for
on the
however
plus
long
side,
we're going to do this.
On the plus side, the FDA did approve 3 gene therapies in 2022.
Yes. Yeah.
2 from Bluebird and 1 from CSL Behring. There are more coming behind that. What's it going to take for these advanced therapies to be market successes?
Right. Yeah. I think that's one of the really interesting, noteworthy stories for 2023 is what happens to these approved gene therapies, and can they become a business essentially, right? I mean, we know from this, all the science and stuff that these therapies, these sort of one-time potentially curative treatments, are very effective for patients. Like you said, you mentioned a bunch of them were approved in over the last 12 months, and so the question becomes these come at a great cost, right? We're talking about $2-3 million per treatment, and there is a cost effectiveness argument that is made that when you look at the value of these treatments and if you can potentially cure somebody, then they don't have to take medicines chronically, or they have less need to go to be monitored or to see their doctor. So there is a value to sort of these medicines, and that's the argument that they make. But again, it's very difficult for our healthcare system to digest such a large upfront cost for these therapies. So the question for 2023 is, whether a company like Bluebird, as you mentioned, they have a gene therapy for beta thalassemia that's now approved, and can they make a go of it? Will they be able to attract a significant number of people who are willing to be treated with it? Insurance companies going to reimburse for it? Is our healthcare system going to be able to absorb these costs? And there are obviously many more gene therapies coming down the pike. And when I think about 2023, I think of Sarepta Therapeutics has their gene therapy for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's already been submitted to the FDA, and so that approval decision will happen next year. BioMarin has their gene therapy for hemophilia A. That approval decision will happen. So again, we're going to see a lot more of that, and I think it's a big story for the next 12 months.
Beyond gene therapy, we're seeing a whole range of genetic medicines, from RNA therapies to gene editing, now advancing in the clinical pipeline. How do you see these medicines changing medicine?
Well, yeah, I mean, if we broadly think of, gene therapy and genome editing, think CRISPR type treatments, generally sort of I put them in the same bucket, and some of them are pursuing the same indication. So, for instance, in beta thalassemia or in sickle cell disease, right, we have gene therapy approach, and we have a CRISPR approach, right, and it's maybe a little bit of a different genetic target in each, but at the end of the day, from a patient perspective, it sort of does the same thing. And it's been a pretty decent year for genome editing in terms of the science. I mean, we've had some issues with the FDA, some clinical holds, and that's kind of maybe put a little bit of some weight, sort of dark clouds over it. But I think generally it's been a pretty good year from the science perspective in terms of these progressing into the clinic. We're seeing more data in more patients. Again, the same sort of business model issues are out there. But Vertex and CRISPR Therapeutics, their treatment that they're co-developing for sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia, is expected to be filed with the FDA kind of early next year. And so that is another approval decision that we will get in 2023.
You've spent a lot of the past few years writing about efforts to develop therapies for neurodegenerative diseases. This year, we saw the approval of Amylyx's ALS drug. How significant approval was this?
I think it was pretty significant. Obviously ALS is a disease that I know that the patient community and their advocates have felt like has been a little bit ignored, both from a sort of development standpoint and from an FDA standpoint, and maybe not gotten the attention that it needs to have. So the fact that this drug was approved, and with overwhelming support from the ALS community, was a big move this year. Costs a lot, costs a lot of money, and the question is, are insurance companies going to pay for it? I know there's been some stories written, more recently, looking at sort of the hurdles that patients are having to go through in terms of getting their insurance companies to reimburse for the Amylyx drug. And, unfortunately, that is a problem that, probably many of us who are listening to this, have had with it lots of different medication, prior authorizations and restrictions and the like. And so that is going to be, again, I think that is another story to look at and to pay attention to for 2023, to just sort of see how, what that launch looks like.
We also saw encouraging results for lecanemab. This is an Alzheimer's drug in development by Eisai and Biogen. How encouraging are the phase 3 results?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's we should get the FDA's approval decision on lecanemab probably just right after New Year's. The PDUFA date is January 6th. So I anticipate that the FDA is going to make that decision as we all sort of start the year. And I think that, people pretty much widely expect that drug to be approved. As you said, it's not a cure for Alzheimer's. The clinical trials shows that, not only does it remove the amyloid deposits, toxic amyloid deposits from the brain, but it more importantly slows cognitive decline and in function in patients with Alzheimer's. The magnitude of that benefit is something that is hotly debated. Right, there are people who believe that the slowing of the progression of Alzheimer's that we're seeing with lecanemab is meaningful for patients, and there are people on the other side who feel like it's too modest. It's not enough for a patient and maybe their caregivers to really kind of pick up a difference there, pick up the benefit. So that is going to be a debate that'll be out there. The other issues obviously is just safety and the fact that these types of amyloid targeting drugs do cause brain bleeds and hemorrhaging, microhemorrhages in the brain called, it's a side effect called ARIA that I think people are getting to know a lot more about as medicines like this are developed, and that is going to require a lot of monitoring of patients. And that's that's a logistical challenge for a drug like lecanemab, and it's a challenge for Eisai and their partner Biogen as they roll this drug out to patients. How are physicians going to identify the patients who were maybe best suited for lecanemab, but also just how they get treated. This is an infusion that requires it's 2 infusions a month, so that's a difficult thing to put together. Then there's all the monitoring, and so I think it will be something. This is something that Eisai and Biogen have talked about. I think that they recognize that this is going to be difficult, and that this is not like taking a pill, and it's not a commercial launch where you're going to see instant uptake. We haven't even talked about the cost of we don't even know what the cost is going to be. So there's that whole issue as well. But to be optimistic about it, I have talked to physicians in the last couple of weeks, because I'm just sort of preparing for the eventual approval, and I have talked to again, physicians who treat people with Alzheimer's who are encouraged. They feel like this is sort of the beginning of something. One physician told me that she's been around a long time. She remembers the early days of ACT in HIV. When that was the only drug, and there was a debate about whether, is this really good enough to for HIV? And what happened, that was just the start of the development of a whole host of medicines for HIV, which, again, used to be a deadly disease and is now a disease that's completely treatable and chronic, and people don't die of HIV if they get the medicines that they need. And this physician told me that she feels like that's kind of where we're at with Alzheimer's right now, that maybe lecanemab is it's certainly not the ultimate answer. But it may be the start of something, and that it could lead to other more effective treatments down the road.
We've gotten so used to these phase 3 blowups in Alzheimer's. You think we're finally beyond that?
Blowups in Alzheimer's? I mean, maybe I think we're seeing. I mean, I think we're starting to see the development of those sort of amyloid targeting drugs. We tend to. I mean, sometimes we tend to sort of very simplistically sort of put them all in the same bucket. But there are differences. There are differences between lecanemab and aducanumab. Aduhelm, right? There are differences between these drugs and donanemab, the drug that Lilly is developing and is in phase 3 studies right now. And I think those differences do matter. And as do sort of the trials that you run and the patient population that you enroll. And I think people have gotten smarter about all of that, so that maybe that avoids some of the blowups. But it also may also limit the kind of the potential, right? Because you need to find the right patient, but blowups may also still happen, right? We saw that with Roche's Alzheimer's drug, which, just again, people were somewhat optimistic about it, but, it ended up not working.
Well, another Alzheimer's drug, Anavex, the company reported.
You want to ruin this recording with that conversation, Danny? Come on.
Well,
now.
The company reported what it called successful results. You didn't seem to embrace the success.
It's, what are you going to say? It's when you don't, when you run a clinical trial, I guess I would say, report results from that clinical trial as they are prospectively defined, right? And Anavex is a company that has an unfortunate habit of designing studies, running clinical trials, and then sort of making up their own endpoints at the end. And you can read into that however you want to read into it.
Well, what are you watching in terms of Alzheimer's drugs in 2023?
Well, again, I think the biggest thing will be lecanemab and just the rollout. Again, not to get too technically in the weeds. We know like the initial approval is the accelerated approval, right? So it's technically based on just amyloid lowering. They've already run their confirmatory study. That's the study that was presented back in November, and they will be submitting that to the FDA basically almost the same time that they get the approval. And so, we'll look at that final approval that will come down maybe sometime in the middle of the year. And then, they have to submit all of these data to CMS and sort of to be able to get Medicare reimbursement. And so that's another storyline that we'll be watching. And then I mentioned Eli Lilly's donanemab, that phase 3 study and that program will also, and I think that drug is also under review already for accelerated approval. So again, I think we'll sort of go through this whole exercise that we did with lecanemab this year. We'll be going through that with donanemab in 2023.
There seemed to be more turmoil this year in the executive suites. Biogen was among the companies to name a new CEO, Chris Viehbacher, the one-time Sanofi CEO.
Yeah.
How surprising a choice was he?
It was a little bit surprising, but probably in hindsight, it shouldn't have been surprising. Maybe that's the way I would put it. I think he makes a lot of sense for Biogen, and he's also, local. He's a Boston area guy, and so I think it's an interesting choice for Biogen. We haven't really heard much from Chris since he was appointed. Obviously, he's got a lot of work to do getting started, and the JPMorgan conference is coming up very soon, and he is Biogen is scheduled to speak on the first Monday of the meeting of the conference, and so I anticipate hearing from him and maybe him starting to kind of lay out his vision for Biogen, and noting, maybe how that how that is different from CEOs of the past, and whether he wants to take the company into any new directions. And so that's going to be a fascinating presentation to watch, and I will be there.
This is a company that struggled to move beyond its MS franchise. What do you think he's got to do?
Well, I think that's part. Well, I think one of the questions is whether he does see a future for Biogen in maybe other disease areas that the company has maybe not pursued in the past. I don't see Biogen sort of like pivoting 180 degrees or away from what it's done. I think they will still focus on neurology and neuroscience as their sort of core strength, and I don't see any reason why they wouldn't want to do that. They obviously have interest in immunology, and so in other areas. So that's one of the questions out there. It's like, will he take, incremental steps, like make incremental changes to Biogen and strategy, or is he going to, I don't see him like blowing the place up, but is he going to try to go in some new directions? That's kind of one of the questions I think out there, and he will be asked that, I'm sure.
As the year was coming to a close, Amgen's $27.8 billion acquisition of Horizon basically put 2022 on par with 2021 in terms of M&A activity, but it was a less dynamic year for deal making than many people expected. Is there reason to think activity will pick up in 2023?
It's the perennial question, right? You ask everybody, like, what do you think M&A activity will be in the next 12 months? And the answer to those survey questions is always there will be more, right? Because it's just like it's the thing that I think it's the thing that everyone sort of gloms onto as kind of the sentiment indicator of choice, right? Everyone sort of equates deal making with the movement of stocks and how people are feeling. Like you said, this year was kind of a weird mixed year. Like we had a bunch of deals right at the end, which kind of helped maybe catch up or make up the deficit that we had seen earlier in the year. All of the sort of factors that make for bountiful deal making are in place. Big pharma and big biotech have lots of cash. They have needs. They have to fill their pipelines. They have patent expirations that they have to deal with. So, but does that necessarily mean that we'll see deals? Yeah, like who knows? Like I don't know. We had Albert Bourla at our summit in November, and he made a comment like he's like, yeah, stocks. There's some stocks that are companies that we that have become cheaper, but the companies that you want to buy, they're still too expensive, right? So whether that means that Pfizer is going to go out and buy every biotech company or not, well, I guess we'll find out soon enough.
Before we talk about your annual best and worst CEOs of the year, we did see the Theranos saga come to an end with the sentencing of Elizabeth Holmes to 11 years in prison. Do you think there are lessons here for venture investors or budding entrepreneurs?
Don't lie. Don't get caught by the feds. That's what I'm. That's a saga that just sort of dragged on for a while, didn't it? Like maybe sort of glad, and Sunny Balwani, he got he was sentenced to, and so we can sort of start putting the Theranos thing in the rearview mirror, hopefully.
You do an annual best and worst CEO list. It always helps to sell your company for a multi-billion-dollar price tag to get on the list, but this year's winner was Haru Naito, CEO of Eisai.
Yeah.
How competitive a year was it for Naito?
Yeah, did you like my list this year?
I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, okay. Oh, interesting. It's good.
You know.
Yeah, it's one of those things where so like you said, there's a bunch of people on the list, and ultimately I like to sort of pick one person as the quote unquote winner, even though it's an entirely subjective. It's basically my opinion. So who cares what I think? But like you said, Haru Naito was the best biopharma CEO of 2022. He is the CEO of Eisai. And I named him, for many of the reasons that we just talked about with respect to lecanemab and Alzheimer's. I felt like they just did a really good job of developing that drug in the face of a lot of adversity, in the face of a lot of questions about amyloid targeted antibodies, and so sort of contrasting it with sort of maybe the way that Biogen developed aducanumab, I just felt like Eisai did a really great job, and it was maybe sort of underappreciated by folks because, we are obviously sitting here in the United States, and I think we sort of tend to have a U.S. centric lens through which we look at everything. And here is this Japanese pharma company with quite frankly a very long history in Alzheimer's. They invented Aricept, which was the first symptomatic treatment for Alzheimer's. So maybe people don't really sort of recognize that history and sort of the science that they've developed. So for those reasons, I thought he was a great selection. But at the same time, again, like we talked about, where there is so much there's so many challenging things that they need to overcome going ahead. After, if we assume that lecanemab gets approved, just in terms of being able to make that drug accessible to patients, getting insurance companies to pay for it. So, it's kind of like they're at the 50-yard line and they still got a long way to go to get to the touchdown, to use a stupid sports analogy. But, so again, a lot can go wrong, but I felt like enough went right that he was a good choice.
For worst CEO, you say no winners, only accountability. Who was noteworthy on this year's list?
Yeah, Clay Siegel from Seagen, and again, not to get into all the personal stuff, but the guy did not have a very good year. You get arrested on allegations of domestic abuse, and have to leave the company that you founded and ran for a long time. He's on the list. I put Alexis Borisy on the list. It was probably my most controversial selection. A lot of people really like Alexis. He is obviously a kind of a legend in biotech in terms of his, his VC credentials and the companies he started. And I personally like Alexis too. But I felt like, as the founder of this company called EQRX, which was really founded to try to do things differently in terms of developing innovative medicines, but at a lower price. And he when he founded the company, there was this perception that he had some sort of magic formula to do that no one else had ever figured out, that he was going to be able to. These were not going to be Me Too drugs. These were going to be innovative medicines, and he was going to figure out a way to do that more cheaply, less expensive, and be able to price them more at a discount to what we normally see in sort of the hyperinflated realm of drug pricing these days. And that didn't happen. The company has sort of fallen apart in a lot of ways. And earlier this fall, they had admitted that basically the drugs that they're going to develop, they're going to have to sort of price them at market-based pricing, which means they're going to be as expensive as any other drug. And for that reason, I felt like he deserved to be on this list. And I did get a little pushback on that, I have to tell you. People thought I was a little unfair to put him on this list, but again, it's my list. and I can do what I want. So he's on the list.
You know, the price of having big visions and taking risks is that you sometimes fail.
Somebody else can put together a worse CEO list, and they can do whatever they want. And maybe Alexis wouldn't be on the list. He's on mine.
JPMorgan is coming up pretty fast this year. Are you attending? You said you were.
I am. Yeah, we're actually sending a bunch of people out there this year. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's like full JPM mode.
And has the buzz around JPMorgan changed in a post-COVID world?
You know, I got to tell you, Danny, I think, and this is a hot take, bold prediction. I think JPMorgan 2023 is going to be as crowded and like pre-COVID JPMs. Like, I don't have any sort of scientific evidence to point to other than the fact that like lots of people are talking about it. The number of emails I'm getting from desperate PR people to meet with their companies is kind of going crazy. Lots of party invites being sent out. It does feel like after a long absence, we haven't been in San Francisco for JPM since January of 2020, that people are like clamoring to go back. Like, COVID be damned. People like don't care. They'll get COVID. It's fine. But they want to be back in San Francisco for JPM week, and they're going to be there. And so that's my prediction, that it's going to be pretty crowded.
And maybe a better indicator, how are hotel prices?
I don't know, because we rented a house. And so we're avoiding the hotel situation. And someone else at my company deals with all of that. So I have no idea. But I'm assuming the hotels are expensive, but I don't know.
What are you looking for at JPMorgan and beyond?
I'm looking to avoid getting COVID. And that may be impossible, but we'll give it our best shot. I guess there's like the nostalgic sort of thinking of like, I'm going to be back at the Westin St. Francis Hotel, maneuvering through the crowded corridors, going from room to room. I haven't done that in a while, so I might have to get used to that again. Like, I still in my mind like know how to navigate through the hotel without a map, but I might need some reminders. It's been a while. But more on what you're asking, Dan. Again, what I always like about the conference is it is the beginning of the year, and so you hear from companies and they sort of lay out their vision for the next 12 months and what the priorities are, what the questions are, sort of risks involved with these, whatever they're doing. All that sort of gets laid out, and I like that. I do like hearing from these companies. I think it sort of sets the table for the year. And so that's, I think I'll be spending most of my time, again, running from room to room at the JPM, the actual JPM healthcare conference, and just kind of hearing from companies.
You're not big on making predictions, but do you expect a better year for biotech in 2023?
I have no idea. You'd hope so. I think what's interesting, and maybe not in a great way, is that, it's not particularly like in the last half of the year, maybe from the summer on, we have had some pretty good news come through biotech. I think of like, Karuna Therapeutics with their schizophrenia drug. We just had the Gossamer data in NASH. We had the lecanemab data, first the initial readout and then sort of the confirmation of the data when it was presented at a medical meeting. So I would say like in normal times, all of those events would sort of lift all boats in biotech. And it hasn't really happened, right? All those individual companies and their stocks have done well, but if you sort of look across the sector, has that brought more investors into biotech, and has that lifted the index, whether you look at the XBI or whatever index you happen to look at, it really hasn't done that yet. And so maybe there's a lagging effect there, and that it will catch up. And so maybe early in the year, particularly if we have like more good news, then we will see a more broad-based investor, more investors, generalists coming into biotech. We haven't seen that yet, and that's something that I think bears watching.
Before we wrap, I want to ask you about one more deal in 2022 and whether it's had any impact on you. Elon Musk acquired Twitter. As an avid
Yeah.
Twitter user and someone who's received his share of hate tweets, have you noticed any changes, or do you plan to make any changes in your use of the platform?
I try to stay out of all of the fray when it comes to that. For me, Twitter is a tool, right? And I think about it, and I try to think about it as sort of coldly and as objectively as I possibly can. So, like, is this tool helping me do my job better, reach the people that I need to reach better, and kind of put aside all of the stuff and drama? And I can tell you, like, when I look at, sort of the metrics that I can look at, it's been fine. Like, I haven't seen like a huge diminution in my Twitter audience or in my impressions or whatever. And so what that tells me is that I should just stay on Twitter. Have I sort of made placeholders on some of those other social media platforms? Yes, I have, just in case I wake up one morning and like Twitter is gone. But I really haven't done very much on those other platforms. Certainly a lot less than other people have done who have kind of tried to adopt them and avoided Twitter for whatever reason. And I respect people. I respect everyone. Everyone has to make their own decision. And I respect people who have left Twitter for other platforms. For me, it's just like, as long as it's working for me, I'm going to use it. And I just try not to think too deeply into it beyond that. Like, I just don't really care about all the other stuff that happens.
Adam Feuerstein, Polk Award Winning journalist and senior biotech writer for Stat. Adam, thanks as always.
Danny, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.